Good morning. I'm Sarah Proctor from the IUCN UK Peatland programme, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to day 3 of our conference. We'll start with a wee bit of housekeeping. The unanswered questions raised in sessions will be posted to our notice board. Please feel free to comment, add your own notices, or share inspiring images as you've been doing throughout days 1 and 2. We'll also publish to the notice board this morning a link to the Climate Change Committee report that was published overnight, along with assumptions made about UK peatland conditions to enable us to meet the 6th carbon budget by 2035, as well as recommendations for nearly 80% of UK peatlands to be restored to their natural state by 2050. Do have a look at that in between sessions. So I've had numerous comments from folks over the last days and weeks looking forward to the conference, but several folk have said that they'll miss getting wet feet and meeting new people over a conference theatre, myself included. Today, we hope in a small way to offer a field trip element, so exploring peatland landscapes and the restoration and land management on the ground from across the UK and brought to you in the comfort of your own home. So this evening, we also have our exhibition session from 6 till 7. And this is the opportunity to explore the work of projects from across the UK and internationally, to chat to exhibitors, grab a conference class from previous years if you have one, and enjoy being part of our peatland community. There isn't a dress code, but we would recommend that you use Google Chrome, as Internet Explorer won't get you in. So back to this morning. Over the past 2 days, we've heard policy progress, we've seen the benefits of sharing the global importance of peatlands and the need for collaboration and cooperation within and between policy, strategy, restoration and monitoring. Today, partnerships and projects will share their journeys of delivering peatland restoration and land management on the ground from across the teams and the people that are making this happen. So for our keynote speaker this morning, I am delighted to introduce someone who's been at the peak face of partnership delivery over the last 18 years. Christopher Dean is a member of our steering group and head of programme delivery of a team that's been working on some of the most degraded peatlands in the UK. Chris has been making that journey with Moors for Future Partnership for the last 18 years today. Over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Hello, and welcome to a shed in Huddersfield. I'm the head of programme delivery with Moors for the Future Partnership, and I'm honoured to be giving a keynote address this morning. Sarah asked me to do this as today's my 18 years since I was first taken up onto Black Hill, wading about in bare eroded peat, and just told to fix this, matey. And since that time, that's what I've been doing. Started out with me, ended up with now nearly 40 of us involved in the partnership. Sarah asked me to give some perspective on our journey, and also the journey generally from strategy to delivery across the upland landscape that we've all been involved in. Moors for the Future Partnership has survived for a long time in a world which seems to abhor old ideas, even if they're still effective. So I presently have to regularly argue for our continuing existence, not on the basis of whether the partnership is still effective or we are an effective and efficient instrument at raising 40 million and amongst other things revegetating 35 square kilometres of completely bare and eroded peat, but simply on the basis of being here for a long time and about time we stopped doing this. And have they not finished messing about up on the top of the hill by now? I'm sure this is a common annoyance to all of us as we move into mature delivery phase. There's overwhelming desire from policy and politics to create the new and dump the old, however good the old might be. Reinvention's really expensive and we need to resist it whenever we can. Create right across the UK are really good and really flexible. So I would ask those in positions of power to consider this before a whole scale out with the old is embarked upon. I think it feels frustrating to all of them, but as difficult as it is to deliver something which the whole of society supports. And I think those of us constantly disappointed by the hand that's dealt to our conservation vocation often see the journey to hell in a handcart end of things, and that is often not made easier by media. Media likes to dwell on the dying whales on the beach and the wildfires, and I thought it would be useful to remind us of the journey we've been on since 2002, really. Achieved as a conservation success story is massive. It's absolutely huge, really. It's unique and it's very significant across the conservation of the upland landscape, blanket bog landscape, and the peatland landscape as a Cliftland landscape. So I'm majoring on that. The glass is very much more than half full. So let's just think of the changes, remarkable changes that collectively we've been responsible for since 2002. We have had a whole-scale change in attitude internationally towards peatlands, vastly enhanced recognition of the importance of peatland soils, the largest terrestrial carbon store, and recognition that damaged peatlands are a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. And this is not now just us in this room here saying these sorts of things. This is now up there in world politics, and well done all of you. You know, you've all played a part in that. You've raised the bar by taking part in events like this past, and by work and the noises generally that you've made. 5 News last night. Not many hands going up out there. You're obviously very much a Radio 4 audience. So Channel 4 5 News last night had a very, very long piece on the planting up of the bog in Cumbria. There was a botanist on, there was a very well-informed presenter on, and the Forestry Commission be given quite a ragging out over it. 2002, would that have happened? No, it wouldn't have happened at all. It would have not made national news at all in 2002. So previous activities to our Cinderella peatland environment were accepted with little argument from society. Burning of Indonesia's peatlands, draining peatlands in almost every part of the world where they occur, and little objection to that. The majority of society now understands our peatland environment much better than we did before. The bringing together of science through the IUCN Peatland programme, the Commission for Inquiry, and through all of us working with our universities, created a whole new field of science, and the evidence and support which that's now bringing is phenomenal. And you've all played a big part in that as well. So well done. And just think where we've come from practically on the ground. If I could share my slide with everybody. This is a view of Bleaklow in 2003 on the left, and the same area taken in the past 2 years on the right. And this staggering improvement to nature and human wealth, it's not just a phenomenon of the Most of the Future Partnerships work. If Tim or Paul Ledbitter, they could show you very similar staggering improvements across the north of England. We found the same sort of improvements across Northern Ireland when we visited with the IUCN conference, when we visited Belfast last year. And the same achievements are visible across the southwest, right across Scotland and Ireland. And we need to maintain this ambition. Can I have the next slide, please? And very quickly, one of the big ambitious things we're looking at across the north of England is basically to tie a lot of our peatland activities together. We have contiguous peatlands across almost 7,000 square miles across the north of England, and we need to shout about that. I'm not going to say much about the Great North Bog Initiative, which is building at the moment. We'll do that at a later date. I finished with the slides. Thank you much. The response of nature is also very robust. It's been outstanding the way that blanket bog recovery is actually taking place across the Pennines, and it's exceeded all expectations. We can get nature to recover in the most difficult situations, and we need to make sure our political and policy understand that. When we first started work back in 2002, we were clearly and quite robustly told by many people that we would never get active blanket bog condition back in some of these very eroded, degraded places. That's not the case. We can do that, really. Working in partnership is not easy, but it's often very necessary. We've worked in partnership with 3 water companies: Yorkshire Water, United Utilities, Severn Trent, Environment Agency, Natural England, RSPB, National Trust, many others along the years, all led by the National Park Authority. And working in partnership, it's not the easiest way of doing things, it really isn't, but it is necessary to do that. And communication is the way of making it work. The times I've been really busy, and this is one of those times now, I've not communicated very well. And I have less than happy partners. If you want to work well in partnership, you need to communicate well, really. I'd like to leave this with two quick messages, really, for the future, which I think are really quite important. We need to be better at helping our policymakers design policy to avoid creating hurdles and unintended consequences. I've come to the conclusion that we don't always do that as well as we could, really. We have since 2018, since November 2018, we've actually commented on 11 government consultations, and it's quite surprising how few submissions there were on some of those. Some of those consultations had less than 12 submissions, and these are national consultations about conservation, water, climate change. So what I would urge you to do is to get on government UK website, get on DEFRA's website, find these consultations and actually make submissions. It does make a difference what you say, so please do that. Second ask is around times. We need much more cathedral thinking. If it took generations to build a cathedral, it'll take generations to restore nature. And strategically as a partnership, we're only able to operate over a long trajectory by stitching and overlapping projects together. We have to do that if we're serious about the restoration of the most degraded upland landscape across Europe, which we're still trying to deal with. It's frustrating that policy, politics and funding throughout the past 18 years have been in very short bites, and we need to change this. Any opportunity you all get to encourage thinking beyond one government lifespan will be really welcome. That is one of the main ways we get strategy into action in a better way, really. If we all bang on about this and constantly remind government the fact that they've got a 25-year environment plan and we need longer term action on the ground to be able to deal with that, then that would be a really good thing to do. And as Sarah said, it was quite in order to give you some homework as well. So here's your homework. Look up Radio 4 podcast called How They Made Us Doubt Everything, right? Everybody needs to listen to How They Made Us Doubt Everything. It's 10-15-minute podcasts, and it's brilliant, and everybody needs to listen to it because these are the things that we need to consider. Have a good day at the conference today, and thank you very much from a shed in Huddersfield on my birthday.
There we go, Tim, are we there now? There we go. Sorry about that, folks. And thank you very much, Chris. And for the third time, I'll say a Yorkshireman doubting everything loses its impact a third time round. So throughout today, we've a series of sessions from different partnerships and project approaches of different ages from different areas around the UK. and working on different peatlands. The first of these is from our conference partner, the Welsh Sustainable Management Scheme project.
This is the Mignite. It's the largest area of blanket bog in Wales and one of the finest blanket bogs and heathlands in Europe. Its beautiful rolling moorland contrasts sharply with the peaks of Snowdonia to the west. With several SAC, SSI and SPA habitats, it's an internationally important area of open peatland, which can provide environmental benefits such as habitat for breeding hen harriers, drinking water, carbon storage in peat soils, grazing for livestock, and it's a truly picturesque part of Wales which can be enjoyed by anyone. This area of the Mignite is owned by the National Trust Ysbyty of Fôn Estate. It's seen many scientific projects from universities and research organisations, and it's now seeing changes in management practices. For example, 11 farms have joined together in the Fem Event SMS project to explore new ways of farming for the benefit for nature and people. Here they've introduced hardy cattle to graze the uplands. This is Blaenau. Dominated by heather and grass, this 177 hectare blanket bog is the summer grazing land for Fferm Blaenau. After headage payments ended in the 1990s, grazing levels were significantly reduced as the site entered into a series of Welsh agri-environmental schemes, the latest of which is Glas Tir, starting in 2014. It wasn't until Glas Tir that several ditches across the site were blocked in order to re-wet the peat, after 15 years of reduced grazing levels. Today we'll be taking you across Blaenau, showing you how the thinking behind peatland management here is changing from a prescription-based approach to a more holistic approach. I'm Rachel Harvey, I'm based in Snowdonia National Park Authority, and I manage the Welsh Peatlands SMS project. Joining me today is Martin Clift.
I'm Martin, a Conservation Officer with the RSPB, working to deliver conservation benefits in the uplands of North Wales.
We're going to explore a lower section of the site, where the drainage and erosion is most concentrated. We'll start off at some of the ditches that have been blocked already.
The ditches we're heading towards now on the right of screen were blocked a few years ago by the landowner. They used a standard method to create the peat dams with spillways to re-wet the peat on either side with reprofiling to minimise the risks to stock. And as you can see, the blocks are about 10 metres apart. So here we are looking at how this site has been managed in the past. It is currently grazed at a fairly low level by sheep, and there are a network of ditches all over it. This one that we're stood right next to runs right the way through here, and in Glas Tir, the agri-environment scheme in Wales, it was blocked, and it's looking really rather good, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, so this is blocked in, I think, 2015, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's already holding back a fair amount of water. There's nice spillways, by the side, and there's a fair amount of sphagnum in there as well. So.
Yeah, and you can see the effect of it coming back out onto the blanket bog. You've got sort of areas of shallow water here as well, so you can see the effect it's having wider than just this pool.
So yeah, all in all, worked pretty well on the ditches in this area.
Yeah. Is that tackling the whole problem though? We're not so sure about that.
Okay. So ditches aren't the only thing draining this site. As you can see here, there are several large gullies, hags, and even peat cuttings that also drain the site.
On Blaenau also, these features are also close to each other too, even intermingled, which means you can't manage the site just by blocking the ditches or focusing on any one particular type of drainage.
So here we are at one of the bigger gullies in the area. So with the Sustainable Management of Natural Resources, or SM&R for short, that means we can sort of take a more holistic approach at the site. It's not just going to be focusing on farming benefits of a peatland. Just taking us away from just grazing to looking at how we can manage the site for carbon, for biodiversity, for water quality, and it means we can tackle things like these gullies rather than just the ditches on the site.
Yes, we're not alone with this, and Welsh Government are developing a sustainable farming scheme along those lines, along payment for public goods, and this is what the site's about, really, demonstrating what we can do with that and the ambition that's needed. And this dam, which is working very nicely, was one we put in March.
Yeah, so it's pretty recent dam actually, it's looking pretty good.
Yeah, it's looking nice, isn't it?
So we're just going to show you some footage of that, so you can see how it was done.
We've worked with as low impact methods as we can here, and we've tried to minimise use of foreign materials like wood and stone at this site using the peat which is on site. Using peat in this way does require some very careful work. The contractor you can see here, he's planned his use of the peat by sourcing it from the gully edges just behind him. This means he can build the whole dam without tracking at all, and he's carefully building it up layer by layer, keying each new layer into the previous one so you can create a good, strong, big, flat dam. He's now placing the turf on top of the dam, and these turfs have come from the trench which is now underneath the dam. They've been set aside until now. This not only stabilises the dam, and you can see how he's sort of building them into that top level of the dam, but it helps the water to be able to seep through that surface. And that's the value of having that dam as flat as possible, so there's no pressure on a particular part of it. And of course the sheep which graze this site love to walk across these. They're access points across gullies, and it makes the dam more resistant to that.
And this is the finished product. He used a natural pinch point here and cued it into the edges of the gully. Turfed over like this, it will provide a safe crossing point for livestock too. He's now off to place more dams further down the gully at similar pinch points and bends.
And this is the gully only 6 months later. As you can see, the dams, now a series of them, are working well and holding back water. The dam we just saw being built is the one at the bottom of this frame, and now we're going to take a look further down this pool and join us at a larger pool further down the gully.
This is a photo of that large pool we just saw, and this photo was only taken 3 months after the dam was created. As you can see, we're not short of sphagnum at this site.
So this is what the work looks like 6 months on. This dam that we're stood on here is made entirely of peat, and by the nature of that, we've got to find some way of getting the water to flow out of it, because we can't stop the water flow here. It's got to find a way. So the dam surface itself is very flat. It does flow out there, and there's a very balance to make. We want to try and re-wet as much land as possible, bring that water level up. But if we're too ambitious in that, then there's the chance that the whole dam will flow.
Yeah, and I think the balance has been met pretty well here. This has held pretty well for 6 months. We've had a few storms and everything. So yeah, we've got the balance right here.
Yeah, but it's a very difficult balance to make, and it's something which we're learning.
Yeah, so where we're going to go next, we're going to see where ambition and where that balance is.
Yeah.
We're going to head further down the catchment now to find the largest hags on the site. These hags are mainly situated along the edges of the large gullies.
So here we are at some hag reprofiling that's happened on this site, where the need to modify our approach has been a bit more apparent. This hag from this side has been reprofiled very nicely, covering up most of the big areas of bare peat. This was a vertical wall of peat only a year ago, but the contractor's run into a couple more problems as he's progressed along the bank.
Yeah, so you can see here he's hit a grassier area. It's much harder to tease apart the grass and get that full coverage of vegetation. It's also pretty wet underfoot here, so they've had some difficulties getting the machines in to reprofile it properly. So yeah, this is where the terrain hasn't helped with the methods. And next we're going to go on to a gully, which worked pretty well at the start, and then nature had her say, shall we say.
As we're travelling over the site, you can see this huge gully in the middle, draining the site, as well as lots of smaller connected gullies and peat hags along the edges. There's even the remains of old peat cuttings on the left here.
Yes, and gullies like this have presented us with a real challenge. How can we manage them or block them? We've had to look at flow across the site to determine how the hydrology of the site works. For example, lessening the flow into a big gully by also blocking before it the smaller gullies which feed in.
Yeah, and one of the ways we've done this is with drone data. We had a drone survey of the site done by Yorkshire Peat Partnership in summer 2019, and from this we could use the flow data to interpret the gullies and how they connected across the site. So we've now reached our gully, and it was a fairly similar one to the last one we were looking at. Again, it was blocked in February 2020, but as you can see, we're missing a few pools here.
This is because a week after we finished the work and before the dams had managed to settle properly, Storm Ciara arrived at Blancoid. The gully blocks did survive this storm, but scarcely a week later, Storm Dennis followed, which proved too much for one of the newly laid dams. There was a weakness in one of them, and that's carried on down the gully, that failure. We'll be going back to fix these, and we aim to put a few more dams in between at a couple of pinch points that were missed out, to lower the subsequent pressure on the rest of the dams.
Next, we're moving up to the top of the catchment. Our focus here has been taking the site beyond conventional restoration methods, trying to make the blanket bog as close to near natural as we can. Near natural blanket bog is quite a rare site in Wales, so it's exciting to work towards this here.
So here we are at the top of the catchment, the area where we've worked with the methods we've talked about all the way up through here, and we've got to something where the water table is right at the surface. We've got a dam just there, not necessarily in a conventional gully, but we've seen an opportunity to re-wet, and we're getting the water table right at the surface, and we can start to see a habitat where there's room for this habitat. Is dynamic, it needs grazing, but it doesn't drive the priority. The priority here now is public goods. It is delivery of all those ecosystem services.
And as Martin said, we've got the conventional gully here. We've blocked off some of the runnels and mini gullies. And I'm actually standing on a header bale here, and
In September 2019, we had a day with the volunteers from the Snowdonia Society Make a Difference or MAD weekend. We had them hauling heather bales right up to the top of the catchment here, although we did have a bit of help from a quad bike too.
These heather bales were used to block the small gullies up here. They were keyed into the edges and the base of each gully using spades and a lot of hard graft.
Once in place, they needed to be bedded down, just like with a peat dam, so we had a lot of fun jumping on them. It's important to highlight the value of engagement in events like this. Often engagement is seen as a bolt-on, but it should be an integral part of peatland restoration. This weekend was great fun, and it gave us an opportunity to enthuse a lot of people about peatlands.
Only a couple of months later, the heather bales were doing a good job re-wetting the peat. Heather bales are often overlooked. They're fundamentally leaky, and they aren't as permanent a solution as using peat. But in gullies like this, you can already see the sphagnum forming, and these bales will last long enough for these pools to fully establish and stabilise.
So to say, this is very much the vision for the site, where we're really providing all of those ecosystem services all in one. We've still got the farming here with the grazing, we've got the carbon benefits having re-wetted the peat, we've got biodiversity. We literally just saw a snipe about 10 minutes ago, we didn't get it on camera. The water quality, so we're really providing all those, and there's a great opportunity to try and provide all of those ecosystem services for the rest of this site as well, even the rest of the Big Nine.
Yeah, and it's thinking about all those public goods, which is providing the step change in the thinking that is letting us think about the sites in this way, and thinking about the priority being delivery of all those ecosystem services. And it's apparent more and more when you look at these sites, just the size of the opportunity that's there for the future in what we can turn these sites into.
So where we've been today is only really a small area of the site. It actually extends beyond those two hills there.
Yes, between those hills is an area of hags, which was once a pool system. One of the stories we came across in this project was decades ago, a young family member was paid a pittance, or maybe his lunch, to come up with a spade and drain the pools to improve the land.
Well, thank goodness understanding and strategy has changed a fair amount since then. All that remains now is to say thank you all for joining us on our field trip today, and thank you to all our project partners and stakeholders for making this possible. And of course, last but not least, a huge thank you to Dion and Sam for helping us film on site.
That's great. That was a fantastic overview of some of our Welsh peatlands and the restoration work being done. So we've got Martin Clift and Rachel Harvey with us this morning to answer your questions about the Welsh Peatland SMS, and we've still got Christine with us from our Keynote presentation. So the first question that came through this morning to Martin and Rachel. So is the site already in favourable condition? Rachel, do you want to go with that?
Well, I was going to hand over to Martin actually on this one. He's probably got a better answer.
Martin, whichever.
Yes, I can do. In the sort of traditional sense of how these sites are assessed in terms of the vegetation makeup, yes, it could well be. So this is sort of work we're doing here to sort of basically challenge that idea of condition. And you can have a blanket bog which is in a favourable condition nominally in Wales, but whether that is ticking the ecosystem services, the function, if you like, that the habitat should be, is less certain. So that's sort of where we are, really. Rachel, anything to add there?
No, I think when we were at the top of the site there, this sort of illustrates that point. You know, we want to take it to that vision state where we are providing all of those ecosystem services as public goods, rather than just focusing on the carbon or the vegetation or something like that. So yeah, that sort of answers the question, does it?
Yes, that sounds good to me. So our next question is from Harry, to Harry Mack. So are efforts being made to quantify methane emissions from the water pools being created versus the CO2 update of the surrounding landscape?
We've not done this at this site in particular, but I do know that other places on the Mignite, there have been studies, in fact, a couple of PhDs looking at methane emissions from relatively newly created pools in some of the ditches that were blocked. And that was done a number of years ago now. And I know they sort of found spikes in methane when the cotton grass came in. Essentially, they act like straws, which I think is a big reason why things like the Peatland Code lasts for 30 years rather than just 5. Yeah, in short, not at this site, but work has been done in this area in the past. And I suppose there's no reason why we couldn't get a scientific project in the area again on something similar.
Did you want to add anything to that, Martin?
No, not necessarily, no. That's fine.
So next question in. So does the experience of project managers show we need to plan for ongoing management and interventions rather than just funding the initial restoration works? And I guess we'll ask Rachel, and then probably the same question for Chris regarding what's the future as well.
I'd argue that this is actually where something like the Peatland Code really plays in, having that 30 years of a project looks after that management, which will get the site up to that restored, if not that vision site that we were talking about. It is really important to have the peatland management. For example, in these big gullies, we might want to come back once they've built up and start building up the dams again. It is really, really important. And I think tomorrow there's going to be a lot of talk about the Peatland Code and funding. And certainly in Wales, there's a move towards having blended funding, blended finance. So, initial work is funded by big projects like the Welsh Peatlands projects or from government funding. And then the monitoring and maintenance of the site is then funded through carbon finance, perhaps, or again, maybe centralised funding again. But it is very important to build it in, I think.
Do you want to come in on that, Chris?
Sorry, was that me, Sarah?
Yeah.
I think that the most important thing that we need to resource is people, really. There's lots of funding out there for doing capital works, and I think it's probably a route that government needs to consider. We don't. In some ways, we don't really, it's not as important that we're paying for capital costs of delivering work out of public funding. We need to pay for people out of public funding because it's very difficult to get those costs from elsewhere. If I can put a bum on a seat, really, then that person will generate the funding from a variety of sources to do work. If I haven't got that person, then nothing happens at all. And it's something which is missed in the great scheme of things. Everybody wants to pay capital costs. Nobody wants to pay what is described as on costs and costs of people. But people are the most important resource that we've actually got. And we need to make steps to make sure that we can protect the payment for people to do this work, really.
Great stuff, and agreed, absolutely agreed.
Can I ask a sort of counter question there, Chris? Does that sort of shortage of people, if you like, end up compromising the quality of the capital works often?
I think what compromises the quality of the capital works in a way is the timescales that we work under. So nearly all of our projects, if we could have doubled the timescale, we would have been more effective in what we were delivering. We'd be able to look at the response we got and then alter the next set of work according to the response we were getting from the first series of work that we've done. And this in some ways seems to be getting worse through the present crisis we've got. The Green Restoration Challenge Fund is only really going to fund people for 16 months to do work. The Innovative Resilience Fund that's coming up, that is another short scale fund. We seem to be getting more of a habit of releasing very short time scale funds to do capital works, and that's not really that helpful. We need some long-termism built into this, really.
We find similar in Wales, you know, we get maybe a 5-year funding block for, or maybe even 1 year. And, you know, especially if we want to tie into agro-environmental schemes, they run short-term blocks of 5 years. And when we're looking at peatlands, we want to be looking at, you know, 30 years timescale as a minimum. And so it doesn't really tie in. We haven't got, we're not on the same page with that. So it's an interesting one to try and figure out, because, you know, government policy is generally quite short term. So how do we do that?
Great stuff. Okay, next question, and a little bit of a change of tack. So a question from Stephen Cochrane. So can you please explain why you think the site needs grazing? And so that would be to Rachel or Martin, whoever wants to come in on that.
Do you want to go, Martin?
I can do, yes. It's a really interesting question. I've, to be honest, in seeing various blanket bog habitats, in the longer term, I've not seen too many that are happy long term as a static habitat. They are a sort of more dynamic habitat. And to be honest, in large portions of the UK, that grazing is not necessarily with sheep, it's with deer wandering through or those sorts of things. The idea of Blancoid is to sort of bring the water table up as high as we possibly can and minimize that. But I'm not yet confident enough that we can remove grazing completely. It certainly won't be the priority in the future. Yeah. Rachel, any thoughts there?
Well, from a slightly different background, my background is actually in salt marshes, which is sort of the marine version of peatlands, I suppose. And there's evidence on salt marshes that they are natural grazing grounds. And I think it's the same for peatlands, because they were the open spaces between the trees. And so they have sort of evolved with grazes almost at very light levels. And it's usually, you know, deer, not necessarily sheep, maybe some on cattle. So things like your cows, your hardy cattle are probably better than sheep as a management tool. And we certainly are doing that on some sites in Wales. But it's just worth keeping that in mind, because it's certainly on a drained peatland, you know, it's very easy for the heather to take over or the Molinia grass to take over. So grazing is a really useful tool, a management tool for us right now, to keep those sort of dominant species down and increase the biodiversity of the site.
Yeah, you mentioned cattle there. I mean, we obviously zoomed over a few in the beginning of the video there. And it was discussed with the farmer, the owner at Blancoid as well. But there are quite a lot of barriers to some sort of Welsh black cattle or those sorts of things grazing that site instead of sheep. I think things like the sort of infrastructure, and potentially what's coming up more and more in Wales is the knowledge of caring for those animals, because of the previous 30 years of where the agri-environment support has come from and supported sheep in those areas.
I think linked to that, perhaps, or perhaps not, there's a separate question regarding millennia and the monoculture of millennia and how you're tackling that. If we go to Rachel or Martin, whoever wants to answer that first, and then we might come to Chris in the Peak District, of how you're tackling millennia.
So we're actually lucky enough on Blancoid not to have any millennia, I don't think. And there's a lot of sites in North Wales, just we don't see millennia. But that's not to say it's not in Wales, we do have it. On the sites we've been working on the Welsh Peatlands project, millennia has been tackled mostly through addressing the hydrology of the site first. That's our first step. And then we bring in things like the hardy cattle to graze down that millennia and just keep on top of it, give the site time to recover itself. Yeah, so I mean, millennia is sort of part of a peatland, but we don't want that monoculture, and really that's where those grazes come in again.
Yeah, it's not a big feature of Blancoid. It is there just about. But yes, getting generally cattle grazing at the right time of year in an earlier season, which is getting trickier because of how the farms are managed. But no, we are lucky on Blancoid; it doesn't dominate.
Do you want to come in on how we manage millennia monocultures in the Peak District, Chris?
Yeah, we do have throughout the Peak District, South Pennines, West Pennine Moors, we do have a big issue with homogeneous monocultures of millennia. And we have a big issue, not just from a biodiversity point of view, but we have a big issue from a fire point of view as well. We have some areas which have got into a cycle of catching fire in spring, and the only vegetation which is most efficient is coming back after a fire is again millennia. So we're in this cycle of unintentionally promoting millennia through a series of wildfires that are happening quite regularly, which is a cycle that we desperately need to break. We are doing that by raising the water table where we can. Millennia doesn't like standing water. It doesn't like very wet conditions, so that puts it under some stress. We are cutting and introducing sphagnum where we can do that. So that tends to be the main ways in which we are dealing with. I can see it's going to be difficult to tackle whole scale unless we can break the cycle of regular spring fires taking place. It's the result of a management technique which was used some years ago to burn off all the old thatch so the sheep could get to some early bite underneath, and that has meant that cycle then doesn't happen anymore in an agricultural sense, but it is happening from a wildfire sense. So it's not just the management of the site that we need to consider. We need to deal with wildfires and the causes of wildfires, because there's little point really in trying to get the management right unless we can stop people setting fire to the damp place, really. So we've got a collection of problems which are more rooted in where the South Pennines and Dark Peak are in relation to the large population that surrounds those areas. And if I could just come in on the grazing as well, we've had to exclude sites on Bleaklow, Kinder, Black Hill, other places, because the tastiest food available is the nurse grass crop that we're putting down there, which completely disappears immediately if we have sheep on the site. So we've had complete stock exclusion for a long number of years in order to get those nurse grass crops going. The unintended consequence of that in a lot of places is that we've ended up with an increased amount of biomass. And we even have a situation on Saddleworth Moor where we are now cultivating a Sitka spruce forest with an understory of rhododendron, which is not really what we want, and is going to create a massive fire issue in the future. So the management of vegetation in very degraded areas of blanket bog is a difficult conundrum, because once we have dealt with the initial stages of restoration, we then lead into a situation where the drier conditions produce a lot of biomass, and in an area where we've got a very big wildfire risk, then that feeds into that risk even more. So vegetation management is something which we need to attend to in the future, and conservation grazing will I feel be part of that, but very difficult to bring back when hefted flocks have been lost. So in that there's something within the environmental land game which will allow us to be able to will allow enough funding to allow conservation grazing to take place, because that is a next big step for us across the area which we cover, I feel.
Great, thanks Chris, and thanks for that very complete overview there. So we've got a question that's one of the most popular that you've started to touch on there with your explanation of nurse crop species. But the question is, have there been any sort of studies to identify which plant species were the first to colonise the recovered areas, if any become dominant or invasive? Rachel, do you want to take that first?
The honest answer is I'm not sure on that one, actually. I've not looked at the research on colonisation of bare peat, because, well, also in restoration terms, we tend to be there with the plant plug, so we kind of force it. Or a seed mix and sort of geoduke material to cover it. So naturally, from what I've seen, it tends to be the cotton grasses that come in first, but that might be site specific. There's probably someone out there who knows a lot more than me about succession on peatlands and the peatland that succession happens on.
Chris, did you want to mention anything there? I know you have a series of trajectory reports available.
Yeah, we've done quite a lot of work on nurse grass crops, and that work was leading on from early work on the Pennine Way restoration work way back in the 1980s, 1990s. So lots of arguments and discussions gone through around whether it's appropriate to use non-native grass species. Two schools of thought as that's exactly what you need to do because they die out, so we're not introducing new species. The other school of thought is no, we mustn't do that, we must be using native species. You can't get native species because it's just not possible to get them in the quantities that we need it to do square kilometres at a time of degraded ground restoration work. So we've also got soil chemistry to think of as well. So in severely degraded areas, in our particular circumstances, we have high levels of copper, lead, cadmium, and God knows what from the past industrial activities of the surrounding coal-fired industries, which has led to the situation that we're in now. So we've got acidity on those bare peat areas, which is down to well below that of lemon juice, so nothing even acidic loving plants will actually germinate within that sort of level of acidity. So we've had to deal with soil chemistry first, so we're busy using lime-based products, fertilizer, and then we're using non-native grass seed to produce a nurse grass crop. We used to use easily available farm grasses, so basically crop grasses, silage crop grasses. They are useless in this situation because they're designed, bred, whatever the word is, to produce lots of top because they're food grasses, and that is not what we want. So we very quickly went to the Sports Turf Academy and talked to them, and the sorts of grass species we've been using are the sorts of grasses you get on a football pitch or a golf course. Very, very robust root systems, which is what we need to hold the peat together. But again, they are all grass species. They have numbers and not names, which will die out when you stop feeding them. So the idea is we get a grass, we get the peat covered in a nurse grass crop. We feed it to keep it alive for 3 years, and by the end of that time, it's created enough stability for the surrounding vegetation that there is there to start recolonizing, and that works. That does work quite well. If you've got any chance of getting hold of wavy hairgrass is fantastic, but wavy hairgrass seed, when we were buying it in the early 2000s, was weight for weight more expensive than gold. That's true. It was more expensive than gold, was wavy hairgrass seed. So that's why we've not used a great amount of it, because it's just far too expensive. We've ended up creating a situation which looks like Teletubby land in a lot of bleak low, but it doesn't last like that for very long. I think if we were embarking upon the work we did now, it would be much more difficult to get the Conservation Society as a whole to agree to what were quite outlandish things that we did on Bleaklow, Kinder, Black Hill. But because that has now become an established way to deal with bare ground, then that's fine. It's understood that that's what we need to do. That's been our process. We do have a lot of research material and monitoring material on that, and if anybody's interested in seeing any of that, then just give us a shout or visit the Most for the Future website.
Just to build on that, in Wales we do have bare peat, but our peatlands are quite different. We don't have that industrial pollution from our peatlands have mostly been sort of overgrazed and drained in the past. So we can actually adopt different methods in Wales. We have less bare peat, it's easier to manage. We can sort of get away with just putting a heather or even Millennium mulch down, or putting sort of materials down to cover fresh seedlings that we've sown, and we can kind of take a more direct route to a seed mix. We don't necessarily have to lime the soil and then have a nursery crop. We've got different methods available to us here.
I think that's a really good point about local needs as well. I'm afraid as a conservation policy community, we sometimes lay down laws about thou shalt as far as doing restoration work, and every single site is different. We have sites very close to each other. One has needed top dressing with lime and fertilizer every year for 3 years. After soil testing, we find it's all disappearing. Another site next door to it does not need any at all, and so even in a very local situation, the situation changes, and so we need to be very adaptable in being able to use the right prescriptions for the right sites, and sometimes conservation policy doesn't help us with that because it's rather rigid.
Thanks for that, Chris, and Rachel as well. I think important thoughts there and thoughts to capture going forwards as well. So another question we've had in is forward-looking to Rachel or Martin. Have there been any efforts to model the future implications of restoration, so thinking particularly about dams, being put in place at site? So thinking future modelling, future implications for things like greenhouse gas emissions, water table levels, etc.
Have you got an answer, Martin?
Not immediately, no.
Okay, you can mull over that one. We will, as I said at the beginning, we will pop the unanswered questions on the notice board. So if people want to come in on those at a later date or chat around those will be available to do that.
I mean, I'd say in answer to that one, the closest we've sort of come to the future modelling of the site is using the Peatland Code. So this site did get Peatland Code validation. So we have been through that process. But as far as the scientific modelling and sort of ideas behind it, we haven't done this at this site. Sorry, Chris, you were going to say something.
Yeah, modelling in a slightly different way, really. We're not generally as far up the restoration ladder as others are to be concerned about things like methane, really. If we were concerned about methane, we'd be quite happy, because it would mean that we got peatlands that were far more restored than they are at the moment, really. Our concern is more about sediment loss, and it's about taking decisions about flooding quite often as well. So we've got very few gullies to block up. We've got very few grips to block up, because by the time the world of draining moorlands was given subsidies to do that, the Peak District in the South Peatlands was so completely knackered and covered in natural gullies that it wasn't worth doing any man-made grips. The drainage system was already there in terms of eroded gullies. We are currently doing quite a lot of modelling to find the best places to put gully blocks in through a project called Building Blocks, and that is quite interesting in that it's very landscape scale. We've so far identified 2 million locations for putting gully blocks in throughout the area that we work in, and there will be an output from that in terms of a decision model as to where and how you decide where to put gully blocks in. If you put a gully block in the wrong place, it can actually cause more of a water problem, flood risk management problem in another area. So those decisions are really quite important.
Let's come back to Bannicoed being a Peatland Code site, and I'm conscious both of time, so we've got a few minutes left before the end of this session, but also to flag that we do have a session tomorrow morning covering this. So Bannicoed's a Peatland Code site. The question is, how have you found the application of the code alongside existing public funding mechanisms for the site? Have you got any quick lessons learned that you can share with us?
I would say it's a great scheme, but it is complicated. I think almost all of the Peatland Code sites we've been working on in Wales have required that sort of third-party input. So Martin and I worked really hard on the Peatland Code, well, particularly Martin, on the Peatland Code application for the site. And he came up with this amazing document, which I've used as a template for all of my other ones. It's brilliant. But there's a lot of work that needs to go into it, and you would definitely need that sort of expert advice. If you're a single farmer, heard about this Peatland Code, kind of interested in it, you haven't a clue where to start. So yeah, definitely some support needed there. But yeah, there's a session tomorrow morning detailing a lot more details about this really, and how it's worked. So tune into that.
Yeah, I completely echo that. As Rachel said, it's quite complicated. It was sort of there's quite a number of partners at Bannicoed, 4 at least, and it was sort of hard enough getting them to understand or myself to understand how it's sort of working. Chatting with the farmer about it, it's difficult to get past sort of basic concepts, which are sort of generally easy to agree with, but understanding how it all actually works is very tricky.
So there is, as we've just mentioned, there is the session tomorrow morning on the Peatland Code. There will also be opportunity at the exhibition session this evening to have a chat with Renee, who's joined the IUCN program team as our new Peatland coordinator, Peatland Code coordinator. So I would recommend, having a chat with Renee there. And as Martin said, I think it is really important for Peatland Partnerships to be there to explain to local stakeholders and local partners about the Peatland Code and to understand it themselves as well. So opportunity to do that and training coming down the line that I'm sure Renee will touch on as well around. And on that note, that brings us to the end of the session. So there is opportunity at the breakout session during lunchtime to join some of the speakers from this morning to pick up on any unanswered questions or discussions that may have started this morning. And do join us there for the breakout session at lunchtime should you wish to. Thank you very much.